the truth is still out there. Is the answer really 42? The optimum angle for white light to refract through water and thus form a rainbow is between 40.89 and 42 degrees. The number 42 was the first number to be retired from any professional sport. It was worn by Jackie Robinson, the man that broke the color barrier. There are two physical constants in the universe that are the speed of light and the diameter of a proton. It takes light 10 to the minus 42nd power seconds to cross the diameter of a proton. Because Google says so. So what is the question, you ask? Let's hunt that together. Welcome to the Breakin Broncos Podcast, part of the Answer is 42 Network. My name is Daniel Wetson II, and I am your host. We are brought to you today by AmericanBettingExperts.com and BetMGM. Today is our initial show to kick off things with the Broncos set to face the Titans this Monday. Today we will be breaking down the game, injuries, and going over the best bets for Monday night. So strap in and let's get to it. We're going to start off the show with the bad. That way we can get to the great. On Tuesday, during practice, on the last play of the day, Von Miller rolled his ankle. At first, the team hoped he would just be down for a few weeks with a tweaked ankle, but after an MRI on Wednesday, it was determined that he had completely torn a ligament in his ankle, and he has already scheduled surgery with Dr. Andrews in Green Bay, and I'll let Coach Fangio explain exactly what happened on the play. Soundbite credit goes to DenverBroncos.com.
It was just a normal play. He just rushed around the edge and never hit the ground, never looked bad. If you saw the video, you'd think nothing happened, but it did.
As you heard from Coach Fangio, this was a freak accident. It was just the ultimately unlucky play that could ever possibly happen in a practice. And unfortunately, it has also been considered a season ender, as the initial recovery period will be about 3 to 4 months. So this is going to be completely disheartening for all Broncos fans, as by all accounts, Von was set to bounce back from the subpar, by his standards anyways, 2019. So just listen to Coach Vic also talk about why he was so bummed about the injury. Again, soundbite credit goes to DenverBroncos.com.
Just my own personal feelings were, I was sad when it happened for a lot of reasons. One, mainly for Von, because Von has had a hell of an off season. I kind of reiterated that to you guys many times. I didn't see him, obviously, in the off season, but I talked to him a number of times in the off season. And, when you don't see some with your own eyes, you're hesitant to believe or buy in. But I could just tell by the way we were talking, the things he was doing, that he had a mindset that he was going to come out and have a hell of a season. And when we finally did get back together, it was true. And so I'm sad that he's not going to be able to get the season that he worked for, because it would have been fun to watch for me, for him, for you, for everybody.
So I know a lot of people are trying to downplay this injury and say it's not such a big deal because he's not a QB, but this is not your normal non-QB. The lines at every legal sports book, from FanDuel to William Hill, have moved the line for both the money line and the spread so much that it took the Denver Broncos from slight home favorites to slight underdogs. And this was before the news of the Courtland Sutton injury was released on Thursday. So yes, Miller is not the only Broncos superstar to go down in a 48-hour period between Tuesday and Thursday of this week ahead of their home opener here on Monday Night Football. Now, thankfully, Courtland's injury does seem to be much less serious. According to Adam Schefter of ESPN, he was injured on a non-contact drill. It was just him against the air, and he stretched out and dove for a catch like he just does. The man just can't help it. Even in practice, he's got to show out, and he landed awkwardly on his shoulder and sprained his AC joint. Now, he is listed to day-to-day with an official designation of questionable ahead of Monday's game. So, unlike Von, the Denver Broncos should be able to get him back sooner rather than later. This injury's recovery time varies on severity. Sutton could show up and play Monday and be fine, or he could be out a couple of weeks. It just really depends on how badly he sprained that joint. But again, he did not dislocate it, so he should be back much, much more quickly. Now, we all should hear more around probably late Saturday, early Sunday, if there's any type of update on his injury status. More than likely, you probably won't hear anything until game time. He'll be a game time decision. They're going to let him go through these next few days, getting some treatment, getting things worked out, hopefully get the swelling down. If there is any, we don't really have many details because this is quite fresh news. I mean, I'm recording this here on Thursday night. The news came out Thursday afternoon. So there's not many details, but it has been confirmed he has had an MRI, and it is just a AC joint sprain, not a dislocation. So unlike Vaughn, he's not going to be going on the IR. He'll just be sitting on the sidelines until he's healthy enough to go out there and be able to contribute. So there's a little bit of a silver lining, as they could have actually lost 2 of their superstars for the entire season, or at least a good chunk of it, but it looks like they're only going to lose 1 for a long period of time, and the other one's going to be back fairly quickly, with thankfully not as serious as an injury as it looked on the field. Now, since we've been on the subject of who may or may not be available for Monday night, let's go ahead and switch the topics to something more positive and start talking about the Monday Night Football game coming up on Monday night on ESPN as the second part of a doubleheader that they do every year to kick off the football season. The Broncos have a bit of a chip on their shoulder, not just from the disrespect they've gotten over the last 4 years because of how poor they've played, but they also have a specific player with a chip, and that's Jurrell Casey. He is a ex-Tennessee Titans defensive lineman that was traded to the Broncos in the offseason for a 7th-round pick. The reason that he has such a chip on his shoulder is because this is a perennial Pro Bowl defensive lineman. He has 5 straight Pro Bowls to his credit. And he was just a cap crunch. The Tennessee Titans had to create some cap space to try and make some moves in free agency, which they did when signing Vic Beasley Jr. and Jadeveon Clowney just here recently to shore up the pass rush, which was one of their biggest Achilles heels last year, especially defensively. With that being the case, they didn't even have the courtesy to actually let Jurrell know. And that's why he has such a big chip, is because he had to learn it from his agent. But we're not going to go any farther into that because I'm going to take a deep dive into that later. But the reason I wanted to bring him up is because his run defense is going to be a extremely valuable part of the game plan, because the Tennessee Titans are going to run away from Bradley Chubb as much as possible. Derrick Henry does not want any part of a Bradley Chubb that is angry and out to prove that he is fully back from that torn ACL he suffered last year and cost him all but 4 games. And also, when you add in the fact that even though Henry is the reigning rushing champion with over 1,500 yards last year, and we all know what he did in the playoffs, he has struggled mightily in 2 games against Denver. Henry ran for 12 times for 42 yards, backing up DeMarco Murray as a rookie in a Titans win in December 11th of 2016, and he was also held to just 28 yards on 15 carries in a 16-0 loss to Denver just last October. That, yes, the same year he had over 1,500 yards against everybody else, he could only muster 28 yards against a much less stingy run D of the 2019 Broncos. You obviously see Henry's got a chip, Jurrell's got a chip. So this should be a really fun matchup to watch, is Derrick Henry going over the right tackle and having to fight through a mixture of Jurrell Casey and Mike Purcell. So that's going to be the most important matchup to watch in this game, is the right tackle and right guard of the Tennessee offensive line and the defensive end and defensive tackle of the Broncos, which would be Jurrell Casey and Mike Purcell, as that is going to be where they're aimed at, along with whoever the replacement is for Miller. It's more than likely going to be Jeremiah Attaochu, after all that he did last year in the replacement of Bradley Chubb when he went down, and the offseason that he's had. There's been just constant reports of Jeremiah showing out in practice and really solidified the depth of the pass rush group there in Denver. There's going to be an obvious downtick defensively for the Broncos as they lost Von Miller. I don't believe it's going to be as bad as the way it's depicted by sports books. It's just, as we discussed earlier, this has been completely insane to watch the lines move as much as they have for a non-quarterback injury. I get it that Miller is an amazing pass rusher. He's one of the greatest of all times, and he's one of my favorite players to have ever watched and covered in any capacity. So there's obviously going to be some type of a drop-off there. But I do believe with the additions of the Jarrell Casey's, the step forwards that will be taken by the Draymond Jones and the Shelby Harrises of this roster, and I believe Mike Purcell is going to take a major step up in his second year as a starter, where he gets to start from the beginning, straight out the gate. And I believe that all of this is going to help not completely replace Miller, but it's going to offset him enough that Drew Lock and this offense is going to be able to score points on a Tennessee defense that is going to be limited, especially in the pass rush, by two players that we mentioned earlier, Vic Beasley Jr. and Jadeveon Clowney, as both are going to be on a snap count, to say the least. Jadeveon Clowney just signed his contract with them about a week and a half ago, so he hasn't even gotten any practices yet. He hasn't even made it through the COVID-19 protocol. And so he'll make it there by Monday, but just to tell you just how little he's going to play is how little he's practiced. And then also Vic Beasley Jr. spent the entire offseason on the non-football injury list and just passed his physical on September 5th that allows him to play on Monday night. And add in the altitude of Denver, they're going to be on a serious snap count. So I don't see Tennessee being able to get to Drew Lock the way that they would if this was a couple of weeks further into the season. So I think that's going to be really advantageous for the offense that is going to be able to torch a secondary that I believe is truly limited for the Tennessee Titans. And Jerry Jeudy and hopefully Courtland Sutton are going to have a day. If Courtland's not there, Jeudy is going to go off. He's going to get the majority of the targets. And I honestly believe that this is going to end up with a Broncos win. It's not going to be as lopsided as I believed it would be to begin with, simply because of the losses of Miller and potentially Sutton. And it will end with a Denver win 24-17. That is my prediction. So Broncos fans, even though you've had a bit of a bad break over the last couple of days, don't get too down on yourselves, as you should be able to enjoy at least a win come Monday night. Speaking of wins, now it's time to pay the bills. So stick around after the break while we talk about Clay Matthews, Von Miller replacements, and rookies. I just want to make sure if you are wanting to use my picks or just make your own, make sure you give our sponsor BetMGM a look. Just download the app and use promo code ABONUS, that's ABE bonus, to get free bets. Also, follow all of us betting experts from AmericanBettingExperts.com on Twitter for weekly competitions and free money given away constantly. Just follow @CO SportsFans, that's sports with an S, and DM them for details. And welcome back to everybody that decided to stick around and help me keep the lights on. The first topic that we're going to go ahead and tackle here in this second block is going to be the controversy that had popped up over the last 24 hours regarding Denver Broncos and Clay Matthews. The reason that this came about was obviously the Von Miller injury happened, and the Broncos need to replace him with somebody. And Clay Matthews was probably the best pass rusher available when they were out there looking. So they reached out. They had some conversations. Things didn't work out. That wasn't the controversy, though. The controversy came from when Adam Schefter decided to post up on Twitter that Denver expressed interest in signing former Rams and Packers linebacker Clay Matthews, but was told he is not going to play. Per source, Matthews would have been a strong replacement for the injured Von Miller. And in rebuttal to that, Clay Matthews III stated on Twitter with a retweet, "I never said this," at Adam Schefter. "We recently had communication with the Broncos, but were unable to come to an agreement," with 2 rat emojis afterwards. And the reason I want to talk about this also is because Clay, yes, he would have been a pretty strong replacement for Von Miller, but I don't believe he would have been a starter to replace Von Miller. He would have been a situational pass rusher. And the reason that I say this is because of the serious falling off of a cliff and downturn that Clay Matthews had last year. Even though he did have 8 sacks and that was solid, he only had 37 tackles as a starter, which are the second fewest he has recorded in his career and the fewest he has totaled in a season in which he has played at least 13 games. So that right there tells me that his explosiveness, his strength, that just uncanny athletic ability with an unmatched